here we are being told we're terrible people and everything we're doing is wrong, and our hobby is garbage and we're garbage. And then here's this situation where it looks like a game developer is getting favorable coverage because she has a romantic relationship with the people that are writing this stuff. And it really was like a touchstone for everybody's complaints about how incestuous the entire industry was, about how they faked a lot of what they talked about. It was virtue signaling. We didn't really have that term at the time, but when you look at a lot of the people writing stuff back then, you'd find accounts of them on forums saying just terrible stuff, but they'd write articles saying that you were a terrible person.
Well, hello, ladies, gentlemen, and as always, everyone in between. My name is Clifton Duncan. This is, of course, my podcast. We are marching ever forward. We just reached, we're about to reach 13,000 subscribers on YouTube, something I never thought would happen. It's just sort of a crazy, crazy time. So whatever you're doing, however you're consuming this content, leave me a thumbs up, a like, or whatever. Subscribe to the channel. And of course, share it and help the channel grow so we can do lots of other cool things. If you, as always, if you love it, share it with your friends. And if you hate it, please share it with your enemies. Now, I have a very fascinating guest, who you may not know, but who is very, very important. So we're going to jump right into it. But first, I have some things to say. In August of 2014, a jilted male programmer published a lengthy, gut-wrenching blog post which chronicled in painstaking detail the bitter demise of what appeared to be an extremely toxic, even abusive relationship with a female independent video game developer. What began as a bit of salacious internet drama would soon spiral outward, becoming a cultural whirlwind, garnering widespread press attention, and even spawning an infamously awful episode of Law and Order. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, coincidentally swimming in the right algorithmic water, so to speak, to watch the dumpster fire spread further and further away from the usually benign niche realm of geekdom and video games and into the white-hot center of a simmering culture war, which has, of course, since boiled over. In fact, the firestorm, which came to be known as GamerGate, provided a preview of the current societal and cultural battles that we observe today, living as it did at the intersection, if you will, of pop culture, journalism, and quote unquote progressive politics. Now, one reason that the Gamergate controversy didn't fade away as just a sex scandal that we could amuse ourselves with is because a single video, in my mind, made by a single content creator catalyzed the controversy and made it go viral, unwittingly sparking a cultural firestorm from which we are arguably still feeling the reverberations. So my guest today is sort of an enigma. He kind of specializes in he has his body of work where he specializes in doing these deep dives in these sort of weird, niche internet subcultures. Many of them which overlap with, I guess you would call it far left sociopolitics. And so, in many ways, the whole Gamergate controversy was sort of right up his alley for his really unique blend of very smart, very cutting and lacerating, biting, and often satirical social commentary. So he's gone by many, many names, but Mr. Metokur, also known as, or formerly known as the Internet Aristocrat, or AKA, I was going to make a joke about the N-word, Jim, thank you for joining me here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, so, I mean, it was so long ago that it happened, but it just seemed to be this thing which was spiraling out of control. It just would not stop. And before I get to all that, it just because I don't quite know how to describe you. How would you describe yourself, if that's a fair question to ask?
I guess the easiest way to think of it is a typical internet user from a set period of time. So kind of before modern social media where everybody's using an app on their phone. but definitely after news groups. So it's kind of like that in between, right before Web 2.0.
Mm,
Where you kind of had the freedom to kind of go around and laugh at whatever you wanted to laugh at. A lot of the
right.
sites that were just kind of cutting edge at the time were coming into being. So you had something like Something Awful from Richard, Lotex. Early 2000s was kind of coming up, and then you had Mood with 4chan and kind of mid 2000s. Um, E-Bombs World, which not a lot of people look back, favorably on. But you had, these different kind of sites where you could go on, say what you want, talk about what you want. There wasn't really any heavy censorship at the point, at that point.
Mm,
And the whole idea of being a content creator too, and kind of this monetization scheme of everything that you do is monetized now, didn't really exist. So you just had a lot of mean but playful banter related to pretty much anything, and that's kind of the context in which I kind of came up, and that kind of flavored my perception of what the internet was like and kind of how to behave on the internet. Um, and I guess the lens through which I view interactions online.
right. Yeah. It's so weird. I'm listening to you talk about that era of the internet was often described as the wild, wild west. And even I have a more arts focused show here, but
Mm-hmm.
we sort of have clustered around maybe 2010, where things sort of really began to go off the rails for whatever reason. I'm sure people um, have their opinions about that, but it's also funny is that a constant theme on this channel is freedom of expression, which you've just highlighted, which I think is really funny. And I am interested to hear more, maybe off the beaten path a little bit, but more on
Sure.
your thoughts, because you've been sort of notoriously anti-monetization with a lot of your stuff. I mean, you've deleted whole accounts which have gotten lots of views. You ruthlessly mock other creators who urge you to donate to Patreon and smash that like button. What is? Do you have like a particular aversion to the monetization, or just something that goes against your principles, your ethos in some way?
Well, I mean, I am monetized now to an extent. I
Oh
do
well, you're a
lots.
fucking hypocrite.
I know. It's like, have you ever seen that movie SLC Punk?
No, I haven't.
Salt Lake City Punk. It's like a '90s movie. It's this. There's a scene where the son, who's like a punk, kind of in a Mormon community, is arguing with his dad. And his parents used to be hippies, right? And now they're like bankers. And he's like, "I'm never gonna be like you, mom and dad. I'm never gonna be like you." And the dad looks at the son and he says, "Hey, I didn't sell out, son. I bought in." So I've got that kind of dirty feeling. You know what I mean? Um, but yeah, no, I mean, you are right. For a majority of the time that I did this, it kind of came with that perception of it was just more for fun than anything, or to talk about kind of what I wanted to talk about or do what I wanted to do. Um, but yeah, God, no, that monetization pretty much has taken over. I think it's weird. I remember when it first started, you would have seen something like Angry Video Game Nerd or that guy with the glasses. I think were two of the kind of trendsetters for, or even Screw Attack, were some of the
Mhm.
trendsetters for like really early monetization for how do we get money off our website? How do we monetize our videos? They used the content creator, label too before a lot of people did. And I always thought, God, that's so weird. Why would you do that? And now you've got now you have 18-year-olds playing Minecraft who are living in mansions,
Or
right?
filthy rich. Yeah. Yeah.
Ridiculously rich, because they draw on that audience, and um, times change. I guess it's adapt or die, I suppose. But
Mm.
yeah, I miss it to an extent. What I definitely miss more though is, yeah, it was that period, that Wild West kind of mentality. A lot of things now online are very politicized, right?
Mhm.
Regardless of which side of the spectrum you're on. It felt like kind of before you could make fun of anything, and the first thought somebody would have was not, "Oh, it's political." More else, it was, "Oh, that's funny," or "Oh, that's weird." Now everything is like this kind of life and death battle between the right and the left, and that really has taken center stage, I think, especially
Yeah.
over the last 6 or 7 years.
Yeah. And I find it, I don't know about you, but I find it so exhausting now. I mean, I definitely went through my phase where, and this was part of how I came on to stumbled upon your content as well. I mean, how can you not find the absurdities of, say, Tumblr funny? But but yeah, I mean, that sense of it was sort of anything goes. And I mean, just the fact that a comedian like Dave Chappelle was worshipped in the early 2000s, but now he's like,
Villainized, yeah.
exactly, now he's a pariah. It just goes to show so much how the culture has shifted. I mean, Thomas Sowell, the economist, said that he likened it to replacing one set of taboos with another. I mean, I compare a lot of these people now. I just call them the left wing version of the right wing, like, evangelicals we used to make fun of during the Bush years.
Sure.
And and it's probably an oversimplification, but I think the difference is, people now, they look at, say, Christianity, and they can say, okay, I recognize that as, a sort of separate ideology with its own doctrine and rules and so on and so forth. But now we have this other ideology which is sort of taken over, and it dominates in the entertainment spaces and the journalistic spaces, the social media spaces, and it's so rigid. Yeah, you going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, it's the idea. I used to describe it as kind of the concept of secular sin, right?
Yeah.
It's the idea that you've offended a religious taboo of a non-religion, right? It's very weird. I mean, you brought up Chappelle. Yeah, he went from being highly praised. I used to watch his show. I still like his stuff, but yeah, now if he tries to say something, he's going to get just a ton of crap for it. They tried that too earlier on. Interesting, if you compare Chappelle to Stephen Colbert. They tried to cancel him back in 2016, 2017.
That's right. Cancel Colbert.
Yep. And it's the weird thing about it is he started to kind of give in a little to that pressure. And I think that's flavored his comedy. Because I remember Colbert when he used to do Strangers with Candy. And if you've watched Strangers with Candy,
it's such a weird show.
It's so bizarre. But I mean, the character he played was hysterical. It was a very funny bit, right? But I don't think he could do that nowadays with the audience that he's kind of cultivated. Whereas Chappelle, I think, could still do whatever he wants because he's like, what are you gonna do to me? I mean, this is a guy Chappelle's a guy that walked away from a ton of money, right? Just a ridiculous amount of money he was like, I'm just not gonna do it. I have my reasons. This is why I'm walking away. But yeah, it's you brought up Tumblr, right? The idea that it was kind of funny, and it was very funny at the beginning. But one of the concerns I had back when I started doing Tumblrs, and it was back in like 2014, 2013, was that we were seeing a lot of young adults, 18 to 20, that were kind of putting forward these ideas of thin privilege, cultural appropriation, these different ideas, but they were taking these concepts to an absurd degree, right? So it wasn't just that, like cultural appropriation, you're not stealing the culture and then mocking the people, right? It's, we don't like your Halloween outfit. Or thin privilege wasn't, oh my God, you're just so cruel to people that are overweight for no reason. It was, oh, if a doctor tells me I need to be a little bit healthier, that's, oppression. So they were taking in this ridiculous, kind of degree, but they were getting it from their professors. And one of the interesting things I had found was there's a group called FIRE. I think it's a Foundation for Individual Rights and Education.
Right.
Started by this kind of like little Jewish guy from like the Bronx, kind of a left-leaning guy. And one of the interesting things he had said was, I was a hippie in the 60s. I remember we protested on college campuses. And at the time, it was very conservative. That was the pressure we had coming down on us. And he said, we were, protesting for free speech. He said, but the sad part was that when we finally got the positions of power, when we became the teachers and the professors and the deans, it wasn't free speech that we advocated for. It was our speech. And instead of, showing everybody how it should have been, we just became the conservatives, which we had, been denouncing up until that point. We swung the pendulum the other direction. And so that's what I kind of, hearing him say that and then watching happen on social media through Tumblr and other things with young college students, I thought, I can see where this is going to go. I can kind of parse out what's going to happen. You saw a bit of that too with Occupy Wall Street. This idea that, you have an underclass of people who are upset with the economic situation, right? That famous picture of all the brokers drinking champagne while people are protesting in the streets. But what's the image that you take away from that? It's somebody named Ketchup on Stephen Colbert talking about pronouns. Or you have a woman with a bullhorn screaming at people saying, no, we need to do a privilege stack. You can't speak if you're not oppressed enough.
Right.
So, it just sucked the momentum out of it. So, I mean, it was, 2013 to 2016 was a very weird period where the joke started to become a little too real, I think.
Well, I just jotted down as you were speaking this idea of ideological infiltration in a way. And, it makes me think about that. I'm sure you've seen this meme go around where it's like, you have a group of people who establish, some sort of hobby or, some sort of subculture or enthusiasm, whatever,
Sure.
a fandom. And then you have a small group of people who come in, and initially they seem to express the same interests as this particular group, but then once they become embedded, then they begin demanding things. Things go their own way, and what you were describing about the Occupy Wall Street thing, I mean, I've seen it. The same thing happened to, I mean, I guess maybe a decade ago, the big thing was like the atheist community, the secular community,
Sure.
where it became atheism, not just atheism, but atheism plus.
Plus, yeah.
And it became so these people said, we need to also focus on, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and increasingly, it just, what happened is that it began to just kind of hollow out what were at one point exciting sort of, I won't call them movements, but sort of cultural phenomena, I suppose. And I began to notice that the more that you let these people in, the more they kind of destroy everything. And what's interesting to hear you say is that you were kind of onto this. Maybe you were a Cassandra in a way, noticing this, because I think a lot of people just said, oh, okay, well, it's just a bunch of crazy college kids doing a bunch of radical nonsense. They'll be smacked around by the real world once they get out. But it's like, well, no, actually what happened is that those kids grew up and then they got jobs, and and they got jobs, not just any jobs, but they got jobs disproportionately in areas of extraordinary influence, namely journalism and media, the entertainment industry, the university system, and Silicon Valley. So
Sure.
now I call them the reality cartel in a way, because they control so much of not just the information that gets out there, but the very way that we view reality. It's very strange.
Yeah, they do have a firm grip on it. I mean, I think it was presented to a lot of people, when you talk about infiltration, right? Their term for it would be intersectionality.
Of course.
And so they sold it as a symbiosis, but it's really more like a parasitism, right? So, they consume it, they hollow it out. They're this parasite that latches on and then kind of, like you said, withers out the host, right? And so you can't just talk about whatever your hobby might be or whatever your interest might be or whatever you might be, I guess, activizing for. It has to include this, this, and this. There's a checklist. There's a proper way of doing it. And these people will tell you what that proper way is. It's very strange. And it's something too that, I mean, if you want to go back even further, there's something you could look up. It's called, oh my gosh, the Sokol hoax, I think it is.
Alan Sokol. Yeah.
Yep. And I think he proved a very brilliant point with that, is you can make up nonsense and it doesn't have to make any sense whatsoever, just so long as you use the buzzwords and you agree with the majority, and they will print it and publish it and praise it and give you awards and accolades. And, he really highlighted that really, really well with his paper. And they got very mad at him for doing that. But yeah, it is positions of power. I mean, you see these people like, they come up through the college system. They're kind of flavored with it. They go out, they go into Silicon Valley, they do their tech startups, they get their angel funding. You see them get positions of power, and, especially in HR, which, gives them kind of almost an iron fist in a corporation to kind of set precedent for how do we interact in the workplace? What are we looking for a hire? How should we get along? Yeah, it really was kind of that early 2010s, 2012 onward and forward. And yeah, lots of groups went through this. I mean, it wasn't just Occupy Wall Street. I mean, even before that, you had Chinology, right, where people were against the Church of Scientology. It was kind of a 4chan driven thing. They were doing protests and sending black faxes to make people waste money at the printer, and just goofy stuff like that. But the same thing happened. The same thing eventually ended up happening, where people started saying, no, it can't just be that. It has to be this too.
Yeah, I mean, so it's actually a nice way to segue into the whole GamerGate saga, and I find it fascinating because nowadays you still find people writing, blaming all of society's ills here and there on GamerGate or whatever this thing was. So the question becomes, what even was it? I think a lot of people, I mean, to me, it just became so convoluted and it was so ridiculous that it just was difficult to explain. But and it was a huge, I know it's become cliche now, but it's become a huge red pill moment for me, even though I was somebody who was always sort of skeptical of maybe government and maybe, and the media especially, but it was such a weird, for me, a weird microcosm of it just sort of became like foreshadowing for seeing everything else, the way that the press operates, the way that this sort of quote unquote progressive ideology kind of takes over takes over these institutions, the gatekeeping, and then I think the biggest impact that it had on me was just seeing how I would see, what guys like you were saying and what you were talking about and what actual the people who supported the movement were talking about. But then I would see how it was reported on. And I said, this is completely, when you see yourself referred to as like a privileged, angry, white misogynist, simply because you see where these other guys are coming from. It really, really stuck with me that, wait a minute, the press just is lying. But that's neither here nor let's just go back a little bit to the beginning. And now I want to hear your recalling of how this all began, because you were kind of the catalyst for a lot of this stuff. You made a video called, I believe it was called The Conspiracy Theory, which was pretty funny.
Yeah, using some Jesse Ventura footage from
yes.
his little TV show. Yeah.
Which was just, it was so amazingly funny and clever. But I remember this video, I think you took it down, but it got over 1 million views before it was removed. And, you really, really hit on something. Because so just sort of lead into let us know what led into the making of that video and sort of the drama that preceded it. If you can think back that far. I mean, it was ages ago.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking 8 years ago. But I guess to set the stage for kind of, at least my perspective, and I think what a lot of people were kind of feeling at the time was, you have a hobby, people enjoyed gaming, right? And so they wanted to read articles related to what's coming out, previews, reviews, that kind of stuff. Very basic stuff, just anything. I mean, think of any hobby you might have, cars, movies, whatever it is. I mean, you're looking to consume information related to that, the newest stuff, people's opinions on it, that sort of thing. But there was a weird trend that started to kind of, I don't know if you'd say explode or just kind of, it was almost an exponential explosion, really. What started off as one or two opinion pieces kind of mixed into a game review or mixed into something talking about a company that's releasing a product. More and more we started to see the people that were journalists chastising their very own audience. You're terrible people. Gamers are horrible. You're all racist. You're all sexist. This is all white people's fault. I remember, I think it was Patricia Hernandez writing for Kotaku, had written an entire article saying that she had I think the article was she had said to somebody, "You're going to get raped" in Gears of War, and how this was the most triggering thing of her life, and how could she do that? And it was like a 50-page essay about this, and it was just ridiculous. Again, this is touching on my experience of kind of early internet, where if you played any multiplayer game, you were going to hear the most atrocious things, whether that was on PC or Xbox Live, didn't matter. You were going to hear some stuff. But yeah, it was this chastisement. I mean, of telling your target audience that they're horrible people. And the only way it started just as you're horrible people, but then it became you're horrible people. But if you want to be better, this is what you should think. This is what you should consume. This is what we like and what we don't like. These are the publishers and developers that should be punished. These are the artists that should be praised. And so that's kind of the setting, the background for what's going on. So that's getting worse and worse. It's showing up at all these different outlets. People have kind of gotten to the point where it feels like it's either completely corporate, where it's a sellout thing, with the Dorito Pope, where it's just Mountain Dew ads and nachos, or you're being yelled at for being a bad person. And so what happened was, this revolves around Zoe Quinn and a breakup with her ex, which, on its own wouldn't have mattered. Nobody would have cared. But it's what he talked about in his breakup letter. He started mentioning things in it. And so this started to kind of proliferate on 4chan and on Reddit. I remember reading about it on V, I think, a few days afterwards. And people were like, yeah, that's really weird. So I went to go read it. I was like, I wonder why everybody's so interested. I remember reading it. And then I remember going on social media and seeing people talking about it. and it just got me mad. I was like, here we are being told we're terrible people and everything we're doing is wrong, and our hobby is garbage and we're garbage. And then here's this situation where it looks like a game developer is getting favorable coverage because she has a romantic relationship with the people that are writing this stuff. And it really was like a touchstone for everybody's complaints about how incestuous the entire industry was, about how they faked a lot of what they talked about. It was virtue signaling. We didn't really have that term at the time, but when you look at a lot of the people writing stuff back then, you'd find accounts of them on forums saying just terrible stuff, but they'd write articles saying that you were a terrible person. I wish I could remember his name. There was one guy that said, I think it was Dragon's Crown. And there's a character in Dragon's Crown, a female that has just very enormous breasts. And he said, if you like this character, you're a pedophile. You're into lolicon. And people were like, what are you talking about? Do you not understand? Like, you understand how ridiculous that is, right? So, just goofy stuff. But yeah,
but the character, it wasn't like an underage.
No, it was a woman, a grown woman, a 30-year-old with
big ass titties.
They were like triple Q. It was the most ridiculous thing you've ever seen. He couldn't be more wrong if he tried to be, right? And so I think one of the designers for the game said maybe you'd like this better, and he sent him a picture of half-naked dwarfs hugging each other, and he got really mad about that. It's a very funny response, but so it was a very weird time. But yeah, reading that and then reading about the relationships, and then hearing things. There's also a group at the time of game devs, indie game devs. I think it was the Young Capitalists, who also had an encounter with Zoe Quinn, and who said that she destroyed them. She used her connections to destroy them, ruin their chances of doing anything. They had written a lot of blogs about this. They covered it in the second video, I think. And that, her friends in the industry, the journalists had kind of helped her to kind of sink them. So, I mean, that was kind of the start of it. But, one of the other major things that kind of set it off too was Monday Matt was a channel that was kind of covering it at the time, Matthew Jarbo. And he had put up a single image from Quinn's game from the Steam store page was in his video. And she DMCA'd that, saying that was unfair to use.
So let me just jump in real quick. So for those who don't know, Matt Jarbo, aka Mundane Matt, is a I think he still is an internet commentator, sort of kind of milk toasty, like Tim Pool with less edge.
That's a good way to put it. Yes.
And so and he had I guess he was more like a pop culture channel with a lot of sort of lukewarm takes about things, and he made a video about this, and that's when Zoe Quinn took it down, even though there was no violation.
Yeah, there was nothing that was actionable on that. It was ridiculous. She did not like what he had to say. He was commenting on what was going on. And so, I had my initial take that I was going to do, had been working on the video, and then saw that Matt's stuff had gotten taken down by a fake DMCA, which made me angry. And I was like, it just kind of reached a boiling point, I guess, where it just was like, I'm sick of being told that, again, my hobby's garbage, that I'm garbage. I'm sick of these people acting like they have a moral high ground when it's pretty clear they're as dirty as everybody else. I'm sick of them flagrantly kind of abusing the system around them to kind of take down criticism or to silence people. One of the things really at the very start of GamerGate that you would see is, and this happened at a lot of subreddits, if you talked about it, you would see comments just destroyed. I think it was our Total Biscuit right at the time. And a few others where there were like thousands of comments. It was just pages and pages and pages, all deleted by moderators. You're not allowed to talk about it. Our gaming.
And really quickly, Total Biscuit, aka John Bain, was a popular video games commentator who really became, I think, one of the most vocal and visible and maybe articulate proponents of the quote unquote consumers in this issue. But he sadly passed away some years ago. But just sort of trying to set the stage and give people who an idea of who people are. But please continue.
Oh, no, yeah, that's fine. Jump in whenever you need to. But yeah, and he did. He got annoyed by it too, because he saw the same thing kind of everybody else had seen. So the story kind of breaks. People are making videos about it. It's being talked about on social media. I put my video up. It starts to gain traction. The actor Adam Baldwin ended up seeing it, and he was the one that used the term GamerGate. Nobody else did. So I mean, right. he put that up on Twitter to share the video, and then used hashtag GamerGate, and that's kind of what kickstarted the whole thing into getting a wider audience.
Yeah, and it's first of all, of course, it had to be a Baldwin to kind of kick all this shit off.
Right. Yep.
But yeah, and it's weird because what I remember at the time when it all, I mean, I literally just happened to be like in the right place at the right time, seeing all this stuff kind of unfold. And at the beginning, I mean, I remember reading the pro, I think his name is Aaron Joni, his post about Zoe, and and you said this in your first video, which I agreed with. It's like it doesn't really matter as much what they do behind closed doors, or how we're not going to get into how toxic that relationship was, because
Right.
Holy shit, what a shit show. But the fact that even people who supported the movement and who would just say, well, it's a consumer revolt. For me, I said that feels to me a little bit disingenuous and reductive, because if it were just that, and if it were just, and people would say, oh, it's just video games. I'm like, well, if it were just video games, then I don't think it would have taken off the way that it did. It seemed to cross so many lines. And
I think it resonated with people. I mean, I think a lot of people saw it and thought, I see, a reflection of that, or a piece of that in something that I'm encountering. Right. I can see it either on the horizon coming down, or I'm in the midst of it already myself, whether I'm in academia, or this is a workplace thing, or in the banking sector, or, finance, or maybe, I'm a big comic book fan. And I'm like, hey, things are, maybe the industry is going to go that direction, or anime. What if the translators decide they want to start doing goofy stuff? And I mean, we're kind of at that point now too, where you look at, especially with comics, kind of what's happened with that. So yeah, I think a lot of it made people kind of pay attention and be like, is this going to happen to me, or is it already happening to me? And again, I think people don't like the idea of a group of people having a position of authority, even if it's something as perceived as minor as just games journalism. Where they're calling the shots behind the scenes, because you had a lot of closing the ranks. I mean, you talk about how this was covered in the press. They all hit with articles that came out within minutes of each other, with the exact same titles, with the exact same bylines. And you had people trying to deny it, like Stephen Totillo, right, from Kotaku, saying, "Oh, there's no conspiracy here. This isn't happening. You guys are just imagining things."
Well, it was weird because then, it was like week after week, there were all these revelations that would come out about things that were kind of going on behind the scenes. And the articles you're talking about, I mean, because I was talking about, I mean, for instance, ABC's Nightline had probably one of the most downvoted videos on YouTube when they covered it, when they featured, I think it was Anita Sarkeesian in one of their videos about this. So, it worked its way up, not just to Nightline, but to like Law and Order and all this other stuff. So what Jim's talking about is I think it was, I can't believe I remember these dates, but August 28th of 2014, you had all this whole string of articles that came out referencing what you were kind of referring to earlier, Jim, about, you had these games journalists writing about how gamers don't have to be your audience, which is ridiculous. It's like saying if you open a restaurant and say, hungry people don't have to be your audience, Right. And I think it struck a lot of people as quite bizarre that all these articles came out at the same time. So then it came out, maybe a week or so later, that there was actually what was it called? Game Journo Pros or something like that. Yeah,
it was a group of them together discussing what to write and how to write it. Yeah,
right, and what not to write about, and crucially as well. And so it was weird. You mentioned before that these people have all these sort of this sanctimonious, false virtue that they try to lord over others, but then they engage in the most despicable kinds of behavior. Or the people that are in their, I call it a cult now, the people who are in their cult, who engage in the very same kinds of behavior, are protected, especially if they happen to have the right genitals. And that's what we saw happen with Miss Quinn. And now I'm not here to say, what did or didn't happen, because it is kind of beside the point. The point is that the way that all these people interacted to publicize and put forth this one particular sort of overarching narrative, that once I began to see that was sort of the censorship you mentioned. I saw that on various chat boards and everything, and I was so amazed by it. Like, dude, people are really asking just really basic logical, questions. That some people were being assholes. I mean, you're talking about video games, right? It's a worldwide hobby. You're gonna have the
Comes with
errant,
the territory. Yeah.
you're going to have like the little, asshole 12 or 14-year-old who's just like trying to troll and like, for kicks or whatever. But then you have people who are saying like, no, I would genuinely like this issue discussed, and they would just get shut down. And so that was a sort of first sign for me that I said, okay, they're not allowing people to talk about this, and I feel a certain kind of way about that. And I guess it was my first glimpse into these sort of, I mean, we use the term authoritarian tendencies of these particular people to completely stifle any discussion whatsoever about what people saw as a really legitimate issue.
Right, and it's kind of foreshadowing almost, I'd say, their control over the discussion of this on the various platforms where it would be discussed. That authoritarian kind of hold they had over people was a real foreshadowing of what we've seen with social media now, where you either get in line with the program, say what we want you to say, or we're going to boot you off of it. You're going to be banned here. You can't say this here. This word censored. You can't think this thought. I mean, look at YouTubers at this point nowadays. And I'm not even talking about people saying just edgy things. I mean, if you look at YouTube in 2006, 2007, everybody's saying the N word, their execution videos up. I understand we're not going back to that. But, even if you had an opinion really that disagrees with 99% of people, if you tried to put that up on YouTube, you're just done. That's just no longer acceptable. If you go onto Twitter and say something that's too outrageous, you're gone. Facebook is kind of a dead zone for that as well at this point. I've noticed a lot of people are kind of doing like the podcast thing because that kind of gives them more wiggle room, right? It gives you a little bit more freedom, a little more independence to kind of do what you want to do. And God knows what they're going to do to you guys, the podcasters in 2 years. I'm sure they're coming, but they'll use something like Joe Rogan, right? As an excuse to do it, or somebody else. They'll pick something. They'll pick some reason to kind of come after it. But I think the stuff you kind of saw during Gamergate, really the pushback against people talking about it, has now been seen in so many other areas. It's ridiculous.
Well, I think also, and this, so Jim and I are talking in the wake of, and again, this is really, politics are in this discussion, but it's not specifically about that kind of per se. But sure. just a few weeks ago, with the decision of the Supreme Court to strike down Roe versus Wade. So right. In the wake of that, you saw this firestorm of racist opprobrium directed toward Justice Clarence Thomas, even though he's only one of 6 people who put forth this particular decision. And you saw people just saying all kinds of vile, racist things. And some people just saw that and they were so horrified by it. But I was like, nope, seen this before. Because I remember during the whole Gamergate saga. So once the story kind of, or the grand narrative became formed in the mainstream press that it was this cadre of angry cisgendered heterosexual privileged white males. Then you had this interesting movement of women, of sexual minorities, racial minorities speaking up and posting comments, posting videos, tweets, and so on and so forth, saying, no, I actually I support what these dudes are talking about. These people are talking about on the quote unquote pro Gamergate side. They had a hashtag called Not Your Shield, which I thought was really interesting to see when you had these people who said, no, you stupid, ridiculous white progressives with your bourgeois minority lapdogs are not going to use me as some sort of virtue armor to defend against your shitty ideology, attacks on your shitty ideology. And I would go back and forth with people like young white liberals who, by the way, I mean, I think we're around the same age, Jim. And, sure. I grew up playing, playing Pac-Man on the Commodore 64, the NES, SNES, all that stuff. So gaming has sort of been a part of my life. Nobody ever excluded me. I was into comic books and like pro wrestling, all that kind of stuff later. Nobody ever gave me any kind of guff because I was black. And yet here I have these stupid quote unquote progressive 20 somethings who are trying to tell me about how racist these cultures are and how exclusive they are. And I'm thinking to myself, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Stop talking down to me. I'm not some fragile, I was going to say fragile monkey or something. We won't go there. But, but to see how people like myself and people like these other, sexual, racial minorities, women, and so on and so forth, were completely dismissed or ignored or just straight up berated. I said, that was like the next level for me, where I said, okay, so that the press is corrupt and they're gatekeeping these stories. But now, because due to this sort of, you mentioned it before, and I've said this for a long time as well, the secular religion, although I call it a cult now, you when you run afoul of their ideology, you think they hate white people. They come after people like me, just, with 20 times the force. And once I saw that as well, I said, okay, well, something is really, really wrong here. Like you can't unsee that once you've seen it.
Yeah, it was pretty obvious. You brought up Roe v. Wade and Clarence Thomas, right? I found that amusing for the reason that I remember for about 3 or 4 weeks preceding all of these decisions, when it came to gun control and abortion and just Miranda rights, everything they kind of ruled on, they viciously went after his wife. And so in the back of my mind, it was always, I always had this picture of Clarence Thomas sitting there like, oh, you want to talk shit about my wife? Okay, well, let's see how that's going to work out for you. But yeah, they really did pin it on him. Who's the actor that played Sulu in Star Trek? Asian guy.
Oh yeah, George Takei. Oh my goodness, dude.
Right. Well, he went on that interview and basically called him an Uncle Tom. Said you're what was it, blackface?
Yeah, he said he's a white man in blackface.
Right. Ridiculous. I couldn't imagine somebody else doing it. And it feels so weird to say that now too, by the way, because you reach a point where it's like there's so much hypocrisy kind of coming from that if you call that out every time, you're a broken record, right? Because you're encountering it so much. But yes, Not Your Shield kind of was this idea that they're not token characters to be used as pieces on a battlefield by middle class, upper middle class white women that are in college. These Tumblrettes, essentially. The same people I was kind of making fun of are now the ones leading this battle cry, and you kind of saw that too. You saw in these kind of news outlets a lot of 20 to 25-year-old white middle class, heavily female, but male too, writing from the perspective of, let us tell you, black man, let us tell you, Latina woman, let us tell you, gay guy, what you should think, feel, act, and how you should be mad about this. Because white people, it's very weird when you've got somebody telling you, when you've got a white person telling you white people are the enemy, and white people are awful and white people lie, you should be like, wait a minute, then why am I listening to you, buddy?
Right. Well, it always rings so unbelievably hollow because, if you truly believed in ideas of like white privilege or whatever, then you would just say next time you see me come along, you would just give me your money, give me your house, give me your wife.
Oh, they never do that. It's always interesting. Yeah. The one thing they like to stay away from is class. They never want to talk about working class, economic factors, any of that. It's always something that's out of your control. The skin you're born with, the sex you're oriented towards, that kind of thing. But I feel bad for a lot of kids who kind of have grown up in this kind of culture, because it's taught them that they are not a person, but more a characteristic. Like, you are defined not by your actions and the sum of your parts and all of the things that you do and how you represent yourself. You are merely represented by the fact that you are gay, or you're black, or you're transsexual, or you're this, or you're that, whatever button or switch or lever or pin or whatever. But that's all you are, and that's all you can identify with, and that's how you get attention, and that's how you prove worth. And I think that's a terrible message to tell people. It's the opposite of what we should be telling people. It should be the content of your character, right? The summation of who you are as a person. All of that factors into it. You're not defined simply by one singular point that helps win an argument on an ideological battlefield.
Well, I actually think it's I have sympathy for the younger people in a different way, in that, you mentioned actions, but, you can take all the actions, the noble actions in the world, like in your life, but Now we live in an era where you can have a single moment captured, on camera, and if it doesn't even have to go viral, just has to go, spread around your town or whatever, and that will become what defines you in the minds of a lot of people. And so there is this, I have sympathy in that they'll be defined by their actions, but also by, like, they'll be defined by actions that we probably took when we were kids, or young people, or stupid or more immature.
Sure.
But now it lives on forever, and in infamy, because it's on the internet now. So there's this level of perfectionism, and a rigid, a desire to remain within, the bounds of what's socially acceptable now. But it's like almost on steroids, because everything's so overexposed. And now these people don't have the opportunity to really mess up and muck around and get dirty and kind of make mistakes in the way that the way that we did.
Well, yeah, youth is about making mistakes. That's one thing I'm thankful for. Thank God, social media did not exist when I was a kid. I pray at night, thanking God there was not a Twitter when I was a child, or a YouTube or something like that. You can't make a mistake. You're right. It's this false pretense of perfection, that you have to be chaste and pure and never make a mistake. And it's retroactive, which is horrible. So even if you behave yourself, according to the current trends, 5 years from now, what the language you were using and the way you said that thing that was acceptable, not acceptable anymore. I mean, we're using the term POC now, person of color, people of color. If I had called a black dude a POC back when I was a kid, I'd have got punched. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you'd be like, what do you mean? What do you mean, person of color? What the hell it's very weird. And the language gets very kind of jarbled. But yeah, kids don't have a chance to make mistakes anymore. And it will haunt them for the rest of their lives. And it's another good distinction, I think, between the era that I guess we grew up in and the era that they're growing up in. I was always taught, and I grew up with the idea that you don't tell anybody who you are. Put your name out there, your address out there, your phone number out there, because you don't know what's on the internet. There are crazy people in the world, right? Very basic safety stuff. But now you look at kids, and what do? Here's my full name on my YouTube page that links to my Facebook, that shows you the class I go to. It shows you who all my family members are, the city I live in, the phone number I have. I have accounts to give donations to all my favorite streamers, and so they know my bank account information and my mom's bank account information. There's no anonymity. I mean, we're heading for, if what I see as being bad right now will be 10 times worse within the decade, because I think the movement will be for the protection of people and for the protection of children and for safety and security. We need real ID. And so that's going to be a back end system when it starts. And they'll sell it to people as, listen, it's okay. You can still call yourself, Sniper XXX 360 No Scope on YouTube. But to have that YouTube account, we need your ID. And when you have a Twitter account with a different name, it also links to that ID. And your Facebook links to that ID. So on the back end, if you ever misbehave anywhere, we know exactly who you are. So we can protect you, right? Until eventually that gets turned front way, kind of front forward, and everybody can see it. That's my fear. I know people think anonymity on the internet's a bad thing. I think that's a perspective that's very new, and I think it's wrong. I think it allows you to express yourself, and for all the terrible things you might encounter, you don't want a system where the spotlight's on you. And that's not even for outrageous statements or nefarious things. Just even talking about what we just talked about kids being stupid and doing stupid shit. They should be allowed to. Like, if you're a kid, you're going to do dumb stuff. That's just part of growing up. And I don't think your life should be destroyed for it.
Yeah. And, I don't know if we can put the cat back in the bag, or, reseal Pandora's box at this point. But, you've obviously spent an internet career, if you can call it that, being very prescient about these things. And especially in the wake of the past few years, I've definitely become more and more concerned about, and even from a more left-wing perspective, back in the day, just in the wake of the war on terror and encroachments into our personal liberties and privacy and those sorts of things. And I mean, I'm someone who's sort of unique in that, my background is as an actor, and I'm sort of weird in that I don't necessarily seek the spotlight, but I'm comfortable in it. So I don't mind putting my stuff out there. But at the same time, I don't understand people who, as you say, think anonymity is a bad thing. The fact that we have someone like you around who's able to just come just do these brilliant shit posty deep dives on all these different niches is incredible. I love that we have access, and we have people who are able to do all these kinds of things. At the same time, I think it's also important that we preserve protections for the people who decide to put their faces out there and say things that increasingly we find unsayable.
No, and I agree with that too. Yeah, it's very weird having watched the past, I guess, decade of the internet kind of unfold in the direction that it's gone in. Um, it has gone from more heavily anonymity focused and everything's okay to say to you can only say certain things. And I think part of the reason for that would be that intersectionality, that infiltration, that kind of groupthink. But I don't want to entirely put it on that either. I mean, I think there are other players that are a part of this. I think part of it's corporations. I think a lot of corporations see the internet and it's this huge marketplace. And, I've said this before and I won't say it in the same language because I don't know where you're broadcasting this. So I don't want to mess up anything for you. But it's hard to sell a Toyota when 20 people in the comments are screaming the N word, right? So,
Yeah.
you've got these companies that are like, hey, clean up language, clean up this, clean up this. We want to put this ad here. We want to, sell a bunch of cars. So they have a vested interest in kind of cleaning up how things are presented. And then you have the government as well. With all their different, because the government's bureaucracy, so you've got 300,000 different departments all fighting each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to describe it as almost I said, not all conspiracies are people in a back room together smoking cigars, coming up with terrible plans. Sometimes it's a serendipitous conspiracy where you've got different actors that have a similar goal who along the way happen to notice one another and they're like, hey, that's fantastic. So you've got corporations that want to clean for business. You've got government that wants it clean to take care of, quote unquote extremists. And then you've got ideological groups that want it clean. And they're looking around and like, I agree with you and I agree with you. And let's do this push. And so it looks like this wall of kind of opposition coming towards you when you're just this little guy who wants to say something on your YouTube channel, or you want to say something on your Twitter, or you want to just say a gamer word in your TF2 match, right? And it's just kind of overwhelming. I guess would be the best way to put it. It's become overwhelming to try uh, to do things online anymore. I mean, not only do I feel bad for kids who aren't going to be able to grow up and make mistakes, I feel bad for kids that are not going to be able to be creative. I mean, you said you're kind of into arts, acting, that kind of stuff. Think about the kid that wants to do film. Think about the kid that wants to do music. Think about the kid that wants to do something that's expressive and how stifling that's going to be, because that's going to put over their head a limit on what direction that ever can take.
Well, this is why I began to open my mouth. So I was in New York for a long time, and I was pretty much on my way doing all the things that you should be doing off Broadway and on Broadway and television, and I began to. It's funny because I had all of the GamerGate stuff in the back of my mind, as we were going forward. Then 2 years after that, we had the whole Trump phenomenon.
Mhm.
And which just completely broke the brains of everybody, almost everybody. I mean, not me, obviously, in the entertainment industry. And it was just remarkable to watch everyone just have these complete, utter meltdowns. And, you would see people that were otherwise really highly functional, highly intelligent people just kind of go off the deep end. But, so I'm thinking about, I have the wool pulled from my eyes, I should say, not over my eyes, from my eyes because of Gamergate. And then, so I already went into the whole the Trump phenomenon with fewer blinders on and saying like, there's something that's kind of weird about this. And I know they're lying about a lot of what he's doing, yada, yada, yada. And so I wasn't as pressed about everything, but I saw what was happening with the comic industry. And then it made me think about, Atheism Plus and, what happened in gamer culture. And I said, now these people, And it was weird because I got out of my fancy acting school in 2009. And back then, which wasn't even that long ago, but back then, it was a different kind of, it was a different atmosphere. And increasingly, it's now to the point where, I mean, the casting breakdowns would say masculine presenting, um, uh, what masculine presenting male or whatever, and you have to, when you're gathering for a new play or a new production or whatever, they do a meet and greet the first day, and you introduce yourselves, and what role you take in the production. And so you'd have people say, okay, increasingly you would have people say like, okay, we're going to go around the room, we're going to say our pronouns now. And I managed to weasel my way out of it because, my view on that is that I don't participate in the sort of pronoun thing for the same reason that as an atheist, I don't participate in prayer circles. It just, it's not my belief system. But I began to see increasingly, and then as an actor of color, as they say, I, I would just get these scripts, and it's like, dude, I've got like 2 decades worth of training. I mean, of experience. I've got elite level training, but I don't want to be a mouthpiece for an ideological perspective, which I completely reject, and which, it makes acting no fun because, again, you're there just to be a mouthpiece for a bunch of nonsense that would stop the story cold. And it wouldn't give the, you can't give any of your minority characters any kind of depth now because someone's going to complain about it somewhere, and they're afraid of it. So they have to make everybody perfect and flawless. And nobody wants to see perfect and flawless people. They want to see people like themselves because we all are flawed.
Exactly.
And I just, I began to see these things, especially in the wake of George Floyd's death. That was another thing as well. The industry just said all of a sudden, we are a racist industry. I'm like, dude, my entire career since I was 19, people have been like, dude, you're going to go far if you work hard. But then I never asked for any accolades or any kind of special recognition for, being a person of color and doing what I was doing. But this ideology kept kind of taking over and taking over. And I just said, I felt more and more alienated. So I'm just saying all this to say, like, from the inside, experiencing it, it kind of sucked all the joy out of a lot of this stuff for me, because I'm like, I'm not really with any of this stuff, but because of that, I'm a pariah.
Yeah, it has taken away the aspect of what is fun and what is not. I mean, I could see that in a professional setting and just in basic daily interactions. Like, everybody has to be on guard now. And, I don't, some people, I guess, depending on your political ideology, would say, well, that was the intention. But whether or not the intention or not, it's like you have to put everything you do and say and think through a filter first. Is this acceptable? Can I say this? Can I think this? And it's so damn tiring, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just so damn tiring. Like, I want to be able to sit down with people and talk to them like they're people. And, it's nice that there are still people like that. But more and more, yes, it is. Oh, well, you said this in this way, and because you said this in this way, you didn't use the proper pronoun dance for this, so you must be a terrible person. Where if this were 20 years ago and the pronoun dance wasn't there, they would have been agreeing with you. Oh, yeah, no, I get your point. Yeah. So, it's just, I don't want to have to put on this fake facade of putting a filter on to appease some kind of, you're asking me to put a lot of effort in, I guess is what I'm saying. Like, you're a stranger, right? We meet, you're a stranger. And you want me suddenly to know about your genitalia. It's a very weird opener. Right? Like, I mean, I wouldn't go into a club to meet a chick and be like, hey, I have a penis. It's a very weird thing to do. But like, that's how strange it is. That's what the interaction on the street is with a stranger now, is like, oh, what, am I using the right pronoun? Am I using the right terminology? Can I say I like a certain type of, like, even liking food now is a sin. Like, I can't like tacos apparently because that's culturally appropriation, and it's just very strange.
Well, I do think though that on some level, I do see the messaging, and I guess what I just could call it propaganda. It is working, but then at the same time, I mean, I was in New York City for about a decade and a half, and I fled there once it was clear that it was going to collapse. But now I'm in a red state. It's a blue. I'd say it's more purple. It's leaning more blue lately, but once once I was actually out of that sort of really deep blue environment, just out in the world, interacting with normal people, the average everyday person, whether they're driving an Uber, or they work at the checkout line at Walgreens or whatever. um, I think a lot of people sort of, their knee-jerk reaction is to reject a lot of this stuff, and they look at it as like very bizarre and just kind of strange. And I think increasingly, as we you mentioned before your concerns about an overarching kind of, I don't know if we call it surveillance state, but the sort of digital prison, these digital handcuffs.
That is, I mean, that's always been a concern for me. I mean, you even had
Right.
mentioned kind of your early days and your wariness towards Bush, right? With the stuff like Patriot Act, stuff like
Right.
that. And I'm there with you. Like the idea that the government would have this kind of control mechanism over people, and I think a lot of people didn't really pay attention to what the government and whistleblowers were saying. And I'm not talking about just like people like Snowden. I'm talking like Applebaum and others that were saying, hey, it's not just your software that's compromised, it's your hardware. Like they're
Mm.
putting stuff in your hardware, your CPUs, your GPUs, even your data cables that you wouldn't think is possible, but it's there.
And on top
Um,
of that, it's not just a partisan thing too, because for the Patriot Act, then Barack Obama comes in and signs the was it National Defense Authorization Act.
that blew me away.
Yeah.
So that a lot of people got angry with Trump, right? Because here he comes in and he doesn't really do away with a lot of the censorship they thought he was going to do away with. I felt that way with Obama. Here
Mm.
comes, this is how he was perceived at the time: a young black Kennedy. He's coming in with a
Right.
public mandate.
Right.
He's got everybody behind him, man. He's got the votes, he's got the politics, the machines behind him. He's going to come in and he's going to get rid of all this dirty stuff that's there. He promised he's going to get rid of it. Patriot Act gone. We're not going to have people getting tortured in black sites out of the country
Right.
anymore.
Right.
He's going to fix it. He's promised us he's going to fix it. He's not a part of the system. He's a young guy, young energy, new ideas, new everything. And yeah, he comes in NDAA of 2012, 20, like he just doesn't care. Just it's the same thing. And that was a black pill. That was a very disappointing thing. And I think really I would almost say the last 20 years for a lot of people have probably been eye-opening. I mean, it's not new to say that politicians let you down, but I think it's regardless almost of your political party. I think everybody who's kind of sat there and thought, man, the Republicans came in and they wanted to basically put us in this panopticon in relation to, in response to terrorism. Then the Democrats came in and they just made it worse. And then the Republicans came in and they made it even worse. And now here come the Democrats again and they're making it even worse. It's
Oh
almost
my
like
God.
none of them care. None of them care about us. And it's just it's politics and glad handing and tech companies and donors, and they don't care about the little guy, the little citizen who's like, hey, I'm getting a little nervous with all these freedoms you're taking away and all these cameras you're installing in my house, and all this stuff that you're putting in. And yeah, I'm sorry to jump in, but yeah, the panopticon thing, the surveillance state stuff, that's always been a big issue for me. I've always wanted a politician. You want my vote, that's how you get it. I don't care what political party you're a part of. If you're the guy or woman, whatever, that comes in and says, hey, this is all bad and let's just get rid of it, I'll vote for you day one.
Yeah, but I hate to be too black pilled, as you say, about these kinds of things. It seems now that the rot is just so deep. I mean, as you were speaking, it made me think about, I don't think I've said this publicly, but I feel like Barack Obama may have damaged our sort of people's enthusiasm for politics, um, for a long time to come, because I mean, I voted for him when he was elected. I called my grandmother. It's one of my last conversations with her. She was born in 1936. She never thought that she would see someone like Obama become elected. And I mean, I'm in New York City, and I'm crying in the middle of this bar. We all erupted, and it was a great ride home, actually, back to Queens. I was in Lower Manhattan, and so like it was hilarious because we were all on the subway trains, just cheering or whatever. Then the train would stop, doors would open, you would hear people screaming into the train, we'd scream back out to the train. Like everybody was so excited about it. And then his first 100 days, I was like, oh man, he's really doing it. But then it's like, okay, now he's not going to close Guantanamo. Oh, now he's presiding over a kill list. Oh, now he's droning people overseas. Oh, now he's destroying Libya and North Africa. Like, what the hell is going on?
Yeah.
And it just I just had to kind of detach myself for a while, because it just seemed that, like, as the great Michael Jackson once said, they don't really care about us. But at the same time, especially given all the shenanigans of the past couple of years. And, I look at the response to the kind of material that I put out, which is, like I said, it's more arts and culture focused. But it seems to me that a lot of people, a lot of the conversations that I'm seeing had in quote unquote this space or whatever, people are noticing something is really, really wrong and going really wrong. And I think they're tying it back not just to this particular ideology we've been lampooning this entire conversation, but
Sure.
also an increased reliance on, as you were saying, technology. We're straying further and further away from ideas of, at least in the arts and culture, like, ideas of beauty, transcendence, meaning is what we're kind of getting back towards. And I think slowly but surely people are awakening to this idea that there's something more to life than all these cool gadgets. There's got to be something more to life than whoever is running for the next election or whatever laws are being passed. There's something deeper there, and that's more valuable than perhaps all these leaders or whatever who say they're going to make things more convenient for us if we just install this app, or for our safety and security, we need to input our information. I think maybe people are pushing back and saying, like, no, F this. We want to be free. We hold freedom as paramount to everything else, and this is what we need. We want more reality. We want more freedom. I mean, I don't know if you see it, but I'm kind of seeing maybe a shift, the pendulum shifting the other way a little bit, just to kind of, maybe wrap things up on a more white-pilled note.
Well, yeah, I definitely do think that um, there is a generational cycle. Um, you know, it's debatable on how long it takes for a change to kind of take place or kind of make itself known. I think that I guess the simplistic way to look at it is children will always want to be the opposite of their parents. So if we have a generation raised on the idea of all this silly stuff and all this oversight, then you would hope their rebellion would take the form of we reject that entirely, right? And that the generation that's coming up and the one that'll come after it will be opposed to kind of what we're being subjected to. So yes, white pill definitely in that regard. My only problem with that is it's going to take them a while to grow up to do that, and so I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. Um, but I know there are a lot of political differences in the country, and it's weird to try to have a conversation about something like this without letting it become purely political, right?
Mhm.
Um, but I think really at the core of it, most people agree with the idea that they don't want to be ruled over by anybody to the regard, to the degree that we are. To be micromanaged to this degree is becoming, insufferable. You talked about the aspect of, wanting to kind of re-engage with the idea of beauty and stuff like that. And yes, the ideology or the thing we're being sold right now is we can't respect that which is beautiful because for something to be beautiful, we must acknowledge something is ugly.
Or something is better than something else.
Right. And so we can never allow that because everything must be equal and equitable. Right. And so we can't recognize extraordinary things. And that's sad. There are extraordinarily beautiful things. Human interaction, I think, is, a valuable thing. I think, yes, we have allowed our technology to get in the way of that. I think we're going to see that escalate and get, again, worse before it gets better. But yes, I do have the hope that it is generational, that the pendulum swings, and that 10 years from now they're going to be a bunch of kids. Maybe they'll be dressed up like SLC Punk, right? They'll go back to that 80s punk mentality of fuck you, mom and dad. I'm sorry, but F you, mom and dad. I'm gonna do what I want, and I'm not using no pronouns. You can't make me. That's my rebellion.
I do think I feel like I see a little bit of that. I say because I've been like, God, where are the kids now? Where's Gen Z following all of this? Where's Generation Alpha going to come in and be like, this is so fucking lame? Like,
Right.
it's like, yeah, dude, we get it. Like, not everybody fits into these boxes. That's why kind of with my intro, I'm kind of tongue in cheek saying everyone in between, ladies and gentlemen. Because you got to acknowledge that, I think. But at the same time, it's like, dude, this is so dumb and y'all are so lame and we're going to push back against this. And that's what I'm hoping. I hope against hope that is what happens. Jim, how can people find you or get in touch with you or see or what are you up to these days so people can follow you in your shit posting ways?
Oh well, yeah. I mean, I've been trying to keep that high energy kind of white pill happy mentality. So I do. Kind
Good
of
for
like
you.
yeah, I do a once a month kind of recap stream on my YouTube channel. They can find it there at Mr. Metokur on YouTube. Calling it Year of the Chud. I went with Chud because I thought that's just it's such a as the meme when it was first presented of a kind of a right wing character is so goofy and I loved it. So I went with it and ran with it. I was like, yeah, we're gonna go with that Chud energy of being shit posters, but it's mostly just laughing at things and just the goofy kind of silly things that pop up on the internet, or trying to keep it to that. I mean, it's gotten a little bit dark here the last couple of months with certain characters on the internet, but hopefully back to the funny stuff. I mean, I've got this upcoming month. I've got one guy, a YouTuber. Don't want to spoil too much, but very litigious. Sued a bunch of people for billions of dollars. Stabbed his father in the face, and then sued his father for getting stabbed. That's a first for
Damn,
me.
that's a pimp
Yeah,
move.
yeah. And then accidentally streamed himself. Accidentally streamed himself for an hour and a half naked, eating hot dogs and gobbling like a turkey. So that's the kind of stuff I love. It's goofy, it's weird, it's a crazy story. So I'm very much looking forward to talking about that and kind of deep diving on this guy and his litigation, because he's suing like 30 people right now for even just mentioning his name, which is why I won't
Wow.
do it on your show, because he'll sue
Okay.
you for me bringing it up. So we'll just
Bless
keep it.
you.
We'll keep it very, very vague and bland, and not let him kind of pick up on. I think he has like Google alerts set up if if his name is even mentioned. He's just crazy.
Oh my goodness. Well, we totally need, you're a man after my own heart, Jim, with your irreverence and it just people. If you're being ridiculous, you need to expect to be ridiculed. That's how I look at it. It was such a great pleasure, meeting you and chatting with you today. And I hope people go and support everything that you're doing, because again, we need we're gonna need to laugh a whole lot in, in the coming months, and possibly years.
Well, at least for the next, let's say, 6 months. I think everybody's going to be stuck inside when it costs you like $7 a gallon of gas. Not like you're going to go for a nice Sunday drive. So hey, if you got the time, swing by and hear a guy gobble like a turkey. Light up your afternoon for a day.
I'll be the first person there, and I'll be there with bells on.